Cemetery experiences. So, this is the other creepy cemetery story. This was a year after the previous experience, and this was pretty much when I decided I couldn't work at the cemetery anymore. I sort of debated writing this. It brings up a lot of emotions. I guess to start, the day it happened was really memorable. It was the first time I had been intimate with my girlfriend at the time. When I left her place and drove to work that morning, I was in a completely amazing mood. It was a beautiful day in August. I usually got to work before 8, and I parked at the side of a hill. As I drive up to my usual spot, I notice a white car parked in the middle of the road, at a diagonal, almost blocking the entire road. I parked behind it and thought it was weird, but maybe an elderly person was visiting early or something. I got out of my car and started walking up the hill to get to her office on the other side. On the hill there was a brick path with a railing. As I'm walking up on the brick path, it's really bright, but I can see some sort of person slouched on the path, with her head down low, sort of leaning against the railing. Sometimes there are homeless people who sleep in the cemetery. I thought this was one of those situations, so I got off the path and walked on the grass, trying to avoid encountering the person. But as I got closer, I realized that there was something seriously wrong. I walked a bit closer and immediately knew this person wasn't alive. I didn't want to walk closer, but I could see it was a woman, and she had a thin noose tied around her neck, and there was blood everywhere around her. I immediately ran to the office, and my two coworkers were sitting in the break room talking. I could barely breathe, but I asked them if they had gone up the hill, and they said they saw someone sitting there, so they had avoided going near it. I told them what I saw, more or less losing my shit at this point, and we immediately called our boss, who phoned the police. Our other coworker showed up, but no one went over the hill and saw the person. We talked it over, and decided that the person might still be alive, so we walked back up the hill. But as we got a little closer, it was unreal how morbid what had happened to this person was. It was completely awful. Did this person do this to themselves? I kept thinking this in my head. I know that some people who are suicidal will inflict horrible pain to themselves, but this was a very normal-looking woman, maybe late 40s. She looked like someone's mom. The other weird part was that she was perfectly sitting, almost like she had been placed there or something like that. It could have been a coincidence. I don't know. After that horrible viewing, we went back to the office and waited for the police to come. We stood at the bottom of the hill to make sure no visitor stumbled across the person by accident. It didn't take very long before they showed up, and we gave a description of what we knew. The police, who randomly I knew one of them, tried to calm us down and went about examining the scene. They came back half an hour later and told us they found a suicide note in the car I parked behind. They told us she was a former nurse who had recently lost her daughter. No one knew if the woman's daughter was buried nearby, or why she picked the spot that she did. The police chaplain came to our office to talk to us about what we saw. I'm not a religious person by any means, but what he said didn't have any religious overtones. It really spoke to the mental health issue of suicide. I got a lot of comfort, and I have a lot of respect for police and what they do after the entire experience. I think that the assistance we all got really helped me get over how traumatic the whole event was. I know I read a lot in here about how people still live with some of this stuff and unfortunately still affects them. I really don't think about this event. It was horrible to see, but I've come to terms with what it was. Do I believe it was a suicide? I don't know. I feel like the police might have jumped to the conclusions after finding the note. They really looked at the woman for 30 minutes before they began taking her away. I don't know this process, but that still really shocks me as well. We never had any contact with any family or the police. And no one really ever mentioned this again. Sometimes, when I'm in a big park by myself, I can get a bit uneasy. I should also mention, the police didn't do a very good job cleaning the area, and there was a small brown stain on the bricks where the woman was. Something scary is that my boss, who had worked for park services over the years, said that in the city, people who cut grass or early morning joggers will usually find 5 to 10 dead bodies every summer. The woman on the bridge. Well, this is actually going to be my first Reddit post, and well, let's hope this story gets a good ball rolling. A few days ago, I was at my friend's house for a sleepover. Now, due to my mother being quite the paranoid person, I never really went anywhere, so this was pretty exciting for me. So I'm at my friend's house, and she's really excited and happy to see me. We hug and exchange some friendly conversations before she offers to take me to explore her town. For safety reasons, I'm not going to give the town name, but rather the province, Manitoba. I pack my bags in her room in the corner, and we agreed to head out to go and explore some neighboring woods and an orchard next to a field. It's currently turning spring here, so there aren't a bunch of leaves out yet, so you can see a decent distance into the woods, and well, for this incident, let's just say I wish the leaves were a bit more thick. She leads me through the dense woods, mostly fallen trees and bushes with hard branches, until we come to a river. The water was flowing and it looked wonderful. This may not seem like much, but I rarely leave my house, so I enjoyed little things like this. We begin to follow a beaten path along the river until we come across a large clearing. It was someone's backyard. Now in this clearing, you can look straight across the river, and well, that's what we did. And also when we noticed him. Amongst the trees, there were tied up tarps, and in front of them was this bare-shirted guy with a long straggly beard. The instant we spotted him, he did as well. We held eye contact for more than a few seconds before getting the fuck out of there and onto the street. Feeling safe, we made our way downtown. Still on edge near the woods and such, we came across the town's train tracks. She insisted she show me, and I agreed, and down the tracks we went. Not 500 meters from the road, there is an old wooden bridge, and that's where things got really scary for us. On the left-hand side it laid a body, motionless, and in a really awkward position. Seeing this, we stumbled back and proceeded to gain the woman's attention, but to no avail. In the fear of the worst, I pulled up my phone and dialed 911, and explained to them we found a dead body, and during all this commotion, my friend spots a man coming from the woods, an angry tall man. He walks faster and begins to yell and point at us. We couldn't make out what he was saying, but at the pace he was moving and gestures he made, we didn't bother to stick around to find out. In fear, we fled down the road, operator still on the phone, now contacting the police. We hid in a park nearby as we watched the ambulance arrive in a single police car. We sat in silence as we watched the man move in, prepare for the worst. Minutes passed and the two police officers emerged empty-handed. In curiosity and stupidly, we walked over to them and explained it was us who had called and asked what they found. Nothing. The officer replied. Turns out there was no one there. The man nor the lady on the bridge. Unable to do anything more, they left, and we continued on our way uptown, making sure to avoid the woods. It still bugs me that I have no clue if that woman was okay, or what the man did to her, and where he took her, or what he would have done if we stuck around. He just kept digging. Hiya again. You all might know me from my recent post of Wake Up, but a bit has changed since then. One of the changes being that I recently moved to the outer edge of London from my South African home. This story, unfortunately, occurred while walking around at around 6 p.m. to get used to my new area. Anyways, here it goes. So, as prior established, I was walking around to get used to routes I need to use to get to work, friends' houses, etc. I was about roughly 5 kilometers or so from my apartment. I'd encountered some people on the walk, mostly keeping to themselves, a few dog owners too. All normal. But as I started to get further and further from the residential area, and slowly approached the more parky, a tinge of unease began prickling my spine, as it was getting late, and I'd still have to walk all the way back. I decided I'd walk for 10 more minutes and then turn back, against the better judgment of my consciousness, which said, go back now. One would think with my experience, I'd have learned to trust my gut, but I thought new country, it can't be as bad as in South Africa, right? So, I kept walking. As I got about 5 minutes from the park, there was a house with an extremely overgrown yard, Note, it was still relatively light now, as the sun was still just about setting. I paid no attention to the house until I heard the noise. The methodical scrape, scratch, scrape, crunch noise, coming from just within the yard. The prickle of unease grew to a shock, but yet again, thinking I was safe, I approached even further. There, in the yard, was a man in rags, seemingly digging into something that I couldn't tell. He turned around, smiled at me, not a nice, neighborly smile, but one that seemed like it hid malicious intent. That's when the foul odor hit my nose, as I realized what I thought I was seeing. This man was digging into the corpse of something. Not wanting a repeat experience of last time, I quickly sprinted to the nearest bus stop, ran past two more. Luckily, as I reached the third stop of a bus that dropped off about 200 meters from my apartment pulled up, and I quickly raced inside. When I got home later, I thought about calling the police, but something about the look in that man's eye told me he was long gone by now. I honestly hope I was exaggerating or misinterpreting this, but this I remember clear as day, even though it happened 3 days ago from my time of writing. All I can say is weird digging guy. Let's not meet. Assaulted by a creepy animal killer. This all started about 2 years ago. I was a sophomore in high school, and I moved in with my aunt and uncle. My mom had moved out of the school district to her boyfriend's. I didn't want to leave, so I moved in with my aunt, who was still in the same school district. Because I lived in a very rural, gated community, I had to walk to one of the main roads to get picked up on a bus. The walk only took me about 10 minutes, so it was not a big deal. I passed about 5 houses on the way there, one of which was vacant. 2 weeks into the school year and I get off the bus. I'm walking home as normal, and I hear rustling in the woods, 10 feet to my right. I panic but calm myself as I realize it's wooded area. There's animals, duh. Until I hear a voice call out, "Hey, wait!" I freeze, as I see a boy around my age emerge from the woods, holding a journal. He's on the taller side and very stick-thin. As soon as he gets closer to me, I realized he wasn't what you would see as normal. He talked with a funny tone and made weird jerking motion, which all seemed not to be staged. I immediately felt uncomfortable, but I was always a nice person, so I smiled and waited for him to come up to me. He just stared at me for about 10 seconds, no expression. My smile faded and he must have noticed because he got closer into my personal space and announced that his name was Kyle. I smiled and said hi in a quiet way, slightly. Still not having any facial expressions, he turned and walked into the woods, not even glancing back. At that moment, I quickly walked home and didn't think much of it. It became a routine for a good 2 to 3 months. Every afternoon, he would emerge from the woods and just stare at me. We hadn't spoken since the first encounter. I figured that him being a boy probably just had a crush on me, but was awkward around girls. He would just stand at the edge of the trees and watch me until I turned the corner onto my street. Then things became weird. I was lying on my couch, home alone, when there was a loud, fist beating against the glass as hard as possible, knocking on the door. I jumped and made sure I was out of view from the glass door. The knocking became softer, and then I heard someone say, "Hey, I need help." Being out in the country, I figured they were frantic, the reasoning behind the harsh knocking. But then my brain began working and I realized it was Kyle's odd voice. I walked to the door and opened it. "Hey, can I help you?" I stared into his blank eyes as he glared at me. "Why didn't you answer when I first knocked?" He screamed out and lunged at me, grabbing the sleeve of my shirt and roughly pulling me towards him. I quickly fought against him and grabbed onto the doorframe to pull myself back inside and slam the door. He turned around once again and calmly walked off my porch and down the road, the same journal in his hands. I made sure I locked all the doors and windows in the house after this. When my uncle came home, I was immediately going to tell him about the incident. I was still a bit shaken up. Not only did he grab me with unexpected and excessive force, but he had to have been watching me walk home to know where I lived. I debated on how to ask my uncle about the strange boy. I decided on asking, Do you know a boy named Kyle around here?" He nodded calmly and continued strolling on his phone. "Yeah, I'm buddies with his dad. I actually had to threaten to beat some kid's ass for messing with him. He's got some things wrong with him, messed up in the head. Why? I decided on just telling him about the first encounter when he introduced himself. All he told me was that his name was Kyle. The next thing my uncle said is what me stayed silent about Kyle for the rest of the time living there. I better not find out you're messing with him, 'cause I'll beat your ass too. I wasn't sure if he was joking or not, but I wasn't taking any chances because of his serious tone. I was scared that if I said anything about Kyle grabbing me, that my aunt and uncle would look at me like a bad person, the one that was picking on a kid with special needs. I was just so scared they would make me move in with my mom and change schools. I just stayed quiet about it. A couple more months passed. I still saw Kyle every day walking home, but he was also coming over to my house in the evenings. I would hide in my room, door locked, whenever he was over. I always skipped dinner and avoided going downstairs. He came over 2 to 3 times a week to watch TV with my uncle and or eat dinner. Only one time did I go downstairs, and I saw that damn journal lying on the coffee table. Skip forward a few weeks. I'm home from school, and it was a little bit strange. I hadn't seen Kyle on my walk home. This was the only time he wasn't there since the whole thing started. I came home to an empty house. My aunt and uncle would often go to their friends, so I would be home alone until 6 or 7 normally. I was asleep in my room when I heard a loud bang. I immediately wake up and realize someone had just slammed the door. I had locked it when I came inside, so I figured it was my aunt and uncle coming home, since they were the only ones who had a key. But I hadn't heard any noises for a couple minutes after the bang. Now, nobody ever comes upstairs where my room is. All that's up here is a closet, bathroom, and bedroom, so my aunt and uncle never come up. I kind of panic when I hear heavy footsteps coming up the stairs because, like I said, no one besides me comes up here at all. So at that moment, I get off my bed and walk over to my door, pressing my ear against it. Big mistake. The footsteps stop and I hear them begin walking around the short hallway. It happened so quick, I couldn't even try to defend myself. My door comes flying open and I feel myself fall back on the ground, and I see a figure coming down on me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out because my panicking was just too strong. I start thrashing around as my arms are being held tight, and someone's legs are straddling my waist. After a couple seconds, I was able to identify the person as Kyle. The black expression, and the voice once he started screaming in my face. "Why don't you love me? Why don't you talk to me? You always ignore me. I hate you. I'm going to kill you. You need to die." He continued shaking me as he was screaming in my face. Since I was a little smaller than him, and he was on top of me, there wasn't much I could do except cry and try to get out from underneath him. Once he was done screaming and shaking me, he calmly got up and left my room. I stayed on the floor and continued sobbing for the rest of the day, so shaken up and scared. I also realized something. My aunt had noticed the spare house key missing a few weeks ago. Kyle must have stolen it. After this, I was done. The next day, I missed school, and I told my mom that I wanted to come stay with her because things weren't working out here. I never told anyone about the physical things Kyle did. I did tell my friends, who also lived in the same gated community, about Kyle's daily watching. About a year later, my friend messaged me and told me something that made my blood run cold. Kyle had been arrested after someone walking into the woods. I found a small fort behind Kyle's house. Inside was a large amount of knives and a couple handsaws. The worst thing, dead animals, mainly cats, some dogs, a couple rabbits. All had been cut up, decapitated. Body parts hung from trees, body parts nailed to the trees, and inside the journal were pictures of every animal he killed, from beginning of the torture to their death. So Kyle, not sure where you are now, but let's not meet ever again. The Woman in the Ditch. When I was little, I would always play on our balcony that overlooked a ditch. We, my family, lived in Mexico, which is known for its churches and very intense hills. To get to our house from the street, you had to climb down a very steep stairway, which led to other houses. Our house was the lowest point of a valley. Our house was 4 stories, which included a basement, and the level floor where you entered the house was right next to a ditch. You couldn't see the ditch from the front of the house, but in our back patio, where our water well and pool for washing clothes were, there was a ditch that was a steep 30-foot drop and was about 20 feet wide. Where the ditch stopped created a vertical hill. There was a small forest of shrubbery and trees. You could not get to this forest, since it was basically an island. The ditch curved around it, and just a peak of land on it. I hope that I'm describing this well. It's kind of hard when you really want to use Spanish words to paint a picture. Anyways, my mom would always let me play on the balcony as long as someone was in the kitchen, which is right at the back door of the house. I was drawing on the balcony surface with chalk when I need to wash my hands. Since there was a well there, I started to go towards it when something in the forest caught my eye. I looked over to see a woman. She was wearing a very dirty embroidered dress, and her tangled black hair reached the small of her back. She was hunched over with her back to me on an uneven ground. She was picking up leaves and twigs as well. I kept staring at her, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to know how she got over there, and I wanted to do it too. The woman slowly shuffled her way up the steep hill and gathered some more pieces. This all happened so fast. I called out to her, "Senora!" Mrs. in Spanish. As soon as the words escaped my mouth, she turned her head and I saw her face. It was white and incredibly wrinkly. Her eyes were a glowing milky white. Her mouth was hanging open, and it looked like there was a bloob on her lips. As she was turning, she lost her footing and screamed. She fell down into the black ditch. Her scream was so loud and unnerving I had to cover my ears. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't move. The shrill sound echoed in all directions. My grandma came out from the kitchen in a panic. Everyone in the house came out to see what had happened. I told them what I saw, and someone started bringing out flashlights to see if they could see the woman. My dad, rest in peace, found a portable floodlight and shone it down in the crevice. They found no one. The body dump. I've posted this before on a couple Ask Reddit threads that both died off with little interest. I thought I would post it here, seeing as it may be a better fit. Okay, so several years ago, back in April of 2009 IIRC, I just gone through winter quarter the first time I went to college, and was taking some advantage of spring break. I, along with 3 friends, decided to get outdoors, as it was the first truly nice day of the year. So, I live in Western Washington, and there's a stretch of road that hugs the edge of Bellingham Bay and Sandwich Bay north of Puget Sound. It is called Chuckanut Drive, and it's a cool stretch of road to drive on, as it hugs a cliff face for a while and overlooks the water. Along the way, there are a number of turnoffs to get a picture and other touristy stuff. Anyways, my friends and I drove up there and pulled into one such turnoff with the intention of hiking down to the water and enjoying some lunch, beer, weed, and just enjoy the day. Now, the trail we took bottomed out next to a set of train tracks that hug the coastline like the highway above it. This is a relevant detail here, as many transients and other assorted weirdos traveled its length quite often. In fact, we sat on some driftwood on the other side of the tracks next to the bay, and watched several go by as we hung out. No one bothered us, and we didn't bother them. But half of them were not completely dressed, and things like blankets and even tarps were a common sight to see draped over them. We were there maybe an hour or so, before realizing that the place was actually way more boring than we thought it would be, and decided to head out and find something else to do. So, as we were leaving, we spotted what looked like a far better path back up than the one we came down on and chose it instead. And this was where our day took a bit of a turn. Not long after we started hiking up this new trail, we all saw what was obviously a blanket, or something wrapped around something else. It was easy enough to see that it was covering something big and solid, but not as big as a full-grown human being. But we knew instantly. It was a body. to this day. I can clearly recall how I kept chanting in my own head, "Don't be a child, don't be a child, don't be a child." Walking up to it, we saw that it was not a dead kid, which I am so grateful for to this day, but sadly was a dead dog. Its head was missing, having been cut clean off at some point just above the collar, which it was still wearing. There was absolutely no blood, and the blanket was still very clean, as though it had just been pulled from the linen closet moments prior. There was no smell from the body either, so I guess it hadn't been there for very long. Furthermore, branches and shrubbery had been cut or pulled free and set up in a way to attempt to hide the body from the tracks, which were maybe 10 to 15 feet from our location. It was obviously a body dump. Someone had murdered this dog, this poor dog, and dumped the body by the railroad tracks, and they had done it very recently. At this point, we both looked at each other, decided to know the fuck out of there, and raced up the steep trail back to the road. We reached my buddy's blazer and burned rubber out of the place as quickly as we could. We later called the sheriff's office about this, but I think they just assumed that a stray dog got hit by a passing train when we mentioned that his head was missing. We never heard back from them about anything on that incident. So, I just have to assume they either didn't find it or didn't look. Regardless, I haven't gone down that stretch of road since.